During the early 50s, I used to ride my bike from Talara up to the high school, and every day went past the jail. I never imagined I'd one day end up inside the jail. An audience on this subject. Before I get down to High Street, I want to briefly describe how my perception of Maitland and Maitland District changed as a result of travel. I just grew up in the place. I enjoyed the place. I loved riding the bike around the Maitland District. I enjoyed the life of High Street and the various shops. I worked for Kappa's for a while. I worked for Mr. Willis, a hardware shop, my Sunday school teacher. But it wasn't until I went over to England for postgraduate study that I suddenly realised Maitland is something very, very special. I hadn't realised until then that the cluster of close villages like Largs, Woodville, Patterson and so on is, I think, unique in Australia, certainly unique on the east coast of Australia, eastern side. The nearest I know would probably be the Barossa Valley, which is very different, but it has something in common there. That very, very British landscape with small discrete villages separated by short distances, great for cycling, is something very special, and I hope it'll stay that way, although I see the conurbation of the Greater Newcastle conurbation spreading into some of this beautiful landscape. The other thing I realised when I got overseas and started to study European architecture is that the architecture of the Maitland and Hunter area district and the Hunter Valley generally is very distinctive. There are various influences working on it because there's the government architect, New South Wales Government Architect Office building the courthouses and the schools and so on, and the post offices, but there's also the banks. But apart from that, the sort of high-end Sydney influence, there's a lot of what I call vernacular or just folk building, people doing their own thing. And there's quite a distinctive flavour among the older, mostly Victorian buildings of the Hunter area. I particularly like Dungog, which is an unspoiled Hunter Valley town, and a great place to stay for a holiday. So, over a period of years, I acquired a different eye, a different way. I suppose being a tourist, I learnt the hard lesson of how you become a tourist in your own town, and most people don't do that. And because of that lack of self-awareness, most Australian, particularly the country towns, have a real problem on their hands. They want the tourist dollar, but they don't know what the tourists are interested in. And I would say that the Sydney or the official New South Wales government tourist agencies are very, very seriously incompetent. They have, after considering the superb international exposure we got at the Olympic Games, how do they manage to lose the plot since then? Tourism is down, suffering very badly in Australia. But I checked a few figures out on the net the other day. The Hunter Valley is doing well. And the last figures they had, the last government figures for the year 2011, tourism to the Hunter Valley jumped 15%. Now that's a very significant economic figure in these hard times, but the fact is tourism is the world's largest industry in the service section, and all up it's about the 6th biggest industry in the world. And that's where I think we should be looking for the economic drive when considering this project, the virtual tour of High Street Maitland. I also realised from my overseas experience that Maitland has this wonderful dichotomy of East Maitland, a planned town with a rather boring grid, which the government architects seem to enjoy, but West Maitland is a natural town. And naturally, unfortunately exposed to the force of nature too, but the High Street is a real natural British organic development following the old bullock track along the river, and with a crazy, erratic, but delightful street plan full of fascinating buildings. Virtual tours are nothing new in the idea of virtual tours. If you look up on the net, you'll find there are millions of them, but most of them are just collections of shots. I mean, real estate agents do virtual tours, as you know, of properties. It's just a series of shots strung together, so you can get some idea of what you're looking at and buying. David, Seif and I have conceived a much more sophisticated project, which I would describe as firstly an historical study, but also specifically an archaeological study, with the aim of producing a very large archive of images, not just visual images, not just pictures of shop fronts, but a large archive which organised according to the structure of the High Street and the various subdivisions along that historic route. This project requires expertise, particularly historical expertise, but also what Dave brings to this, sophisticated skills in dealing with images. Because, for example, as Dave does, if he finds a pile of old photographs with no labels and no indication, you've got to work out their possible date, what they are, if they're damaged. He can sometimes fix them up, restore them. You'll see some examples of his work here. It's superb quality. And once you get those images up, then you can look at the buildings and try to work out what date it is, who owns it, what's going on. All of this information can be accumulated and properly organised so that progressively you get a kind of dossier on the street, and when it's properly organised as a file, say for each address, you can look into the file historically, I would say starting from the present, so you recognise what the building is now, and then go back into the file to the earliest images, memories, recollections, legends, anecdotes, and possibly even sounds. I don't know, I'm very interested in the history of music, and now and again I get glimpses of some of the musical activities in Maitland. One of my closest friends, Anthony Rayner, in Melbourne, is the direct descendant of J.C. Rayner, the American leader of the American troupe, the Serenaders, Rayner's Serenaders. They were a nigger minstrel group that came out in the 1850s. And my friend Tony told me that his great-grandfather came to Maitland in 1853. Now, of course, we can't recover those sounds, but we may have some images of Rayner's Serenaders, or some records perhaps of their visit, or even some contemporary comment in the Maitland Mercury, I don't know. But I would say first that try to disabuse anyone of the simple idea, simplistic idea, that it's just a series of pictures of High Street put onto the computer. That's totally underestimating the project that we are envisaging. Historical research is, we found already on High Street, very, very difficult. We had a meeting with a friend at the Land Titles Office in Sydney, and a senior member of staff there made a presentation with some of his officers, and even to grasp what data is held by the Land Titles Office is like confronting a PhD. I mean, we spoke to the one man in the office who was a specialist on what they had in their vast archives, and what was held by the government architect and what was held somewhere. Even that is a highly sophisticated operation. I was in the State Library the other day waiting to get a book, and I happened just to see what was it called? Card catalogue. Photographs card catalogue. Of course, they have their photographs now, some of them on the computer. This is an old card catalogue. I went through it alphabetically, and there were 25 entries for Maitland. I didn't have time to look at them, but there's likely to find information all over the place, including images or other data recovered from private sources, and private sources are often the most unexpected and interesting ways to acquire. One of my research projects is the life and career of our first resident colonial composer, Isaac Nathan. And there's stuff in the National Library, there's stuff in the State Library and so on, but I found 3 marvellous collections of stuff in private hands. People who couldn't see any value in it, including original material coming down from the family. And that's where I think this project, properly organised, could try to get into such collections. I also think, although it was a bit late in the piece, oral history is very important. There are people, especially some of us here, older, who have memories, stories, perhaps even poetry, songs, childhood memories. I regard all that kind of oral history as very, very valuable. The State Library has an oral history program, but so much is lost. So much is lost. My own father, who was a school teacher here, Pont, grew up in the Hunter Valley, had a very distinctive way of speaking and some very local vocabulary. Fortunately, he died suddenly at 61, and I didn't get round to recording him as I'd hoped to. What would we give now for some of the sounds of the music, say, performed in Maitland in 1850 or 1860? Even a program, a list of a recital program or something, if you find that can be very, very revealing. Isaac Nathan was here for a while. I haven't tracked him out exactly, but there were English artists, teachers of music in the Hunter Valley area, certainly by about in the 1840s, and maybe even earlier. So you get these people who come right across the world and go touring around. To trace those people and their repertoires and the kind of audiences they attracted, all of that is worthwhile doing. So, as I see it, for each address on this long winding street, so you come to number so-and-so High Street, you start with the initial image and to make contact. That's the building that's there now. What was back, and you scroll back. What was back there in 1850, 1840, 1830, 1820? Are there any paintings of primeval Maitland, any drawings? Well, I found a few of early Newcastle recently, turned up the State Library acquired, very early paintings. It was by Wallace, wasn't it, I think? You never know what's there. A lot is lost, and Australia has a very bad record in archival preservation, but every now and again something slips through. I think a project like this should be promoted to raise people's awareness of the file, the virtual High Street files, and encourage the public involvement. That's an educational process. People in England and Europe generally, I would say, are much more aware of this kind of community activity. I know there are historical societies here and so on. That intelligent cultural interest should, I think, be encouraged. A project like this will probably need some sort of public support. It's also going to go on a long time, longer than Dave and I will be around for. But I think it's worthwhile. There's a very major educational role in a facility like this, because few people can remember even what Maitland was like 50 years ago. It's very hard. I was pretty familiar with the place, but if you asked me what building was there in the 1940s and 50s, I just wouldn't be able to remember the imagery. So that this beautiful Blackett building, which was demolished in the 1970s, wasn't it? I can remember that building. As soon as I'm shown the photograph, it brings back my memories. But without the photograph, I'd have great difficulty in recovering. Now, behind that building, there may be all sorts of records. Blackett's involvement here in Maitland. He was the leading government architect of the day. What else did he do? Did he have his friends here? And so on. You've seen from the images that Dave presented here already. There's a striking image here of High Street. It's barely recognisable to us. This one of my favourites. David gave me a copy of this one, High Street. As a person interested in architecture, there's a wealth of data there. I know there is a literature, I've been looking at the books published about Maitland buildings. A lot of good work's been done here, but a lot more could be done at a finer detail, particularly the builders. My great uncle was J.T. Pont, the foundry for cast iron. I remember as a child going there and playing with the bits and pieces around. Well, J.T. Pont's cast iron went right up the Hunter Valley. It's a distinctive, independent source. Now, I don't know much about the other factories and so on, but even down to the detailed wooden mouldings that, say, Pender's put out. All those things are individual, and if you have the right background and knowledge, you can see which factory or which craftsman or which trade produced that particular. And I see a lot of very, very distinctive regional detail here, obviously under the general influence of the day, the fashions and so on, but often interpreted with a different taste or a different accent. Well, how are we going for time? I think I should stop, yes. I recommend this project. I have great confidence in Dave Cypher's abilities. He's, in the time since he's retired, he's acquired already an excellent knowledge of High Street, and I do hope the community will take an interest in this project, support it, and encourage its wider acceptance in the Maitland community. Thank you.